I-V-M.
Hi and welcome to Know Your Kanoon. This is Amber from Dana Ventures, and in today's episode I have a wonderful guest and a friend with me on the show. He's also a very senior leader in the tax practice, and I would like to welcome him on the show personally. His name is Mr. Pavan. Hi Pavan sir, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing good, Amber. Nice to meet you, and excited to talk about things that you would want to know.
Yeah, so the story goes like this. I met Pavan sir a couple of years back in my stint with PwC, and since then I've known him, and he's a brilliant guy on tax issues and the tax code which is currently running in the country, which is the Income Tax Act. And let's discuss and find out more about taxation and his personal life and how Pavan has been. And he's reached this feat at a very early age in his life, by the way, for all my listeners. And I mean, it shows the kind of gumption and the hard work and the focus which he had, that he had achieved this level at such a young age. So Pavan sir, tell me something about yourself. Let's start with your early ages and how did you reach and decide to be a tax guy? Because most of our people are still interested in knowing taxation. So let's start with your story.
Okay, so first to correct, Amber, what you said.
Yeah.
I'm not a senior leader. I'm just a beginner trying to learn whatever I can in income tax. Doing whatever comes across to me as a problem statement for the clients, and trying my best to give them a good resolution. Trying to work along with the clients, which is in a way beneficial to them. It is also something which is in line with the tax regulations. I honestly believe from income tax perspective, you have to pay the right tax in India. India is a great market for investors, for investments that you make in India. But at the end of the day, I would believe that the right amount of taxes needs to be deposited with the government. And that's the way to go, because unless you get the right sort of revenue that the government intends to collect, India is not going to be on the growth path, right? And that's the reason I think this profession gives me that platform to assist the clients, to bring value to them, and to bring value to the country that we've been part of. So that's just some opening remarks. But coming back to your specific question, introduction, my introduction. Okay, so that's a pretty long story, but I come from a very humble family. My parents have tried hard enough and given me a platform of good education and which gives me an opportunity to sit in front of all of you guys and share my knowledge on whatever I've learned so far. So that's pretty much in terms of what I have done as a child and what my parents have done for me. So that's really what it is. Not planning to go into specifics. I think that will be too boring. But let's keep the interesting stuff going.
All right. So now I'll start by asking you some interesting stories during your tax career. Maybe let aside from the professional front, which since you've seen the profession grow from scratch to wherever you are today, and I think it's been years of experience on your part as well. So what is your take on that? What do you think you should tell your countrymen, that how is it evolved? Has it evolved at all from what it was and where we stand today? Do you think the compliance regime in direct taxation has been of some change or some value addition to all our investors and all the startups that are planning to come up?
So, look, I think, this is going to continue to evolve. But if I reflect upon how I started my career and how things were, it was as basic as saying that when I used to file the return of income for my clients, there was a thick bunch of papers that were given to us from the income tax department. It ran into some 20-25 pages, and each and every page had to be filled up by hand, write out each of the data. And then if you look at it now, you have like pre-filled income tax returns which are there, right? So I'm giving a very basic example, but that's been the journey, right? So it's been evolution from physical way of doing things to digitalization. Technology has taken over everything, which also means that everything that you do today is being tracked, is being automated. There is not a single transaction that we can execute which is not known to the government, which means there is a lot of trail that is available on everything that somebody does, right? So and that has also helped the country, because over a period of time the government knows exactly how much profit or profit that the clients are making today, taxpayers are making today, and whether there is legitimate taxes that have already been deposited and stuff like that. There were days when it was probably a little hard to track down these transactions and whether taxes have been paid appropriately, but I think those days have gone, and over a period of time it will keep evolving, right? And my message to the countrymen would be very simple, right? Just pay the right amount of taxes and have that transparency on everything that you deal with, so that you have done your job as a countryman, as a resident of a country. You have contributed to the growth of the country, and rest is the growth path that India is already on, right? So you should expect that India will grow faster than any other economy. That's my personal belief.
So, Pavan, from there, what I take from there is most of our listeners have this query with me, which is always in place, that, when we file our income tax returns, and it's a very basic one, I'm not even going to industry, this is very personal, that happens, that people say that, we need exemptions. People look at exempting themselves, and in that process, they get into a lot of stuff which is not ethical, right? And some get away with it, some get stuck with it. Don't you think that even this should be marginalized in a way that, it is automated and it can be tracked? Because, there are certain, incidents or events which I have seen in my career, which are very small though, but where people do tend to get away with such stuff, right? That's owing to the fact that the proof which is attached and the government compliance in regards to people who are working than people who are in the industry or people who are, or big corporates is very different. Like, they do not go after... I would not say go after. I would use the term that they do not concentrate more on this individual, domain than they concentrate more on corporates. They come very harshly down on them as far as compliances are concerned. But majority of the taxpayers are working individuals, or I would say the youth, or however we say between the age of 18 to 40. So what is your take on that? What do you feel the compliance regime currently with the government of India with regards to this? Is it still the same that, एक बार आपको notice आ गया तो आप फंस गए, and with the company sector, it is that, God, please do not send us a notice from the income tax department because we'll be suffering again. So has the compliance regime gone down a little bit in ease of doing business, do you feel?
So look, 2 or 3 elements to this, right? Yeah. Let's start with the first one first. Are we as a countrymen paying more taxes than somebody else sitting in some other country would have paid, right? So that's a basic question that keeps on coming from any individual. Yes. We've recently seen cut downs in the corporate tax rates. Why is the benefit not passed on to individuals and stuff like that, right? But the way to look at it is that it's not only people in India who are paying taxes. All over the globe, people end up paying taxes. There are countries which has tax rates which are higher than what we end up paying. But so the issue is not on whether we should pay taxes or not, because as I said, taxes are required for the growth of the country, right? But what we should be looking at is for the government to make the right utilization of this fund so that it comes back to us as a benefit, right? So today when I walk on the streets, I don't want to walk on the main street and instead of the footpaths, right? So and basic necessity, I need to walk on something which is safe, right? And all of that can come through only the taxes that the government is able to collect, right? So while we can ask the question on whether I should be paying so much taxes or not, we should also ask if we don't pay these taxes, then where is the government going to fund all of the infrastructure that we keep on demanding, right? So I don't think that we are paying taxes which are not getting utilized properly. The only thing is that it is going to take time for the government to reach out to 1.4 billion population today and make the right utilization of the funds, right? So that's one part. Second is, as you rightly said, there are taxpayers who end up paying taxes like you and me, and then there are a set of people in wherever, rural India or wherever you talk about, where people are not being tracked or not paying taxes. But it is just a matter of time, right? We have to give ourselves, or as a country, we should give ourselves more time to reach out to every individual in that 1.3, 1.4 billion population, because as a country, we are too large. Okay, so that's the second part of it. Third, your question on compliance. As I said, the compliance levels have actually eased out over the period of last 15, 16 years that I have been in this profession, right? Not many people have seen those bulky forms and the bulky audits or assessments that used to happen.
Yep.
Today, when I get an assessment notice, actually I'm okay with getting the assessment notice because everything is digitalized, right? In next 6 months or 1 year, I will not end up meeting any of the tax officers, right? I just get a notice, I formally respond to it, which is in a digital medium. Nobody can tamper with that data, which means that if I give them the right data, there is nothing that I need to fear of, right? Maybe as an individual, people get stressed about receiving tax notices. But my message to everyone who's listening to this podcast is that you don't have to fear. Once you get the notice, if you have done the right thing, you have to just give the right set of data to the tax officers. And I personally don't think that it is going to be of any harm. In fact, it is just a way of stating, going back to the government saying that, okay, you inquired about something, we gave you the data, and it is all in line with what tax law demands you to do. So, answer to your question, yeah, sometimes there can be elongated issues, but overall, I wouldn't think that you need to fear if you've not done anything incorrectly.
So, I mean, Pavan answered his question about seniority. He's got 15, 16 years of work ex, so he indeed is a senior guy, guys. So, do not take it very lightly. But, Pavan, on that front, there is a contrasting view in indirect taxation if you look at, right? I mean, there the compliances have rather increased. With GST, they were saying that the burden would go down. But we see that direct tax is really coming out with, or the Income Tax Act is really coming out with solutions which are helping a lot of businesses in ease of doing business. So, in terms of startups, and when we talk about legally, I talk about the compliance regime of startups, and there are different areas of law, whether it is exemptions that Startups India is giving to startups, whether it is a waiver of compliances under environmental health safety. I mean, GST, there is a certain exemption definitely given, and so are indirect tax given. But we still don't see that amount of confidence in public, right? I mean, my question is rather rhetorical on this, is that, we still don't see that confidence because people have this thing in their mind that, the authorities are going to come down heavily on you, right? And that leads to following a very different path on insane advices, not on sane advices. Do you think, where I feel like, now the prosecution has been, I mean, it was added recently in the, if I'm not wrong, correct me there, in the direct tax regime, that, the officers now have the power to prosecute you easily over penalties, right? And the High Court and Supreme Court did come out with a judgment saying that, it will be used in the least possible manner and the rarest of the rarest cases. But I have seen certain areas that it is being used. Don't you think that's a little harsh a legislation if we compare it to globally? Or let's stick it to India specifically, because here the prosecution really takes a bad turn when it happens, right? I mean, we see it in the courts every day. When the prosecution starts, it's very easy to start the process. IRA and other agencies abroad use very different methodologies for starting a prosecution. So what is your take on that? Do you think that's also a discouraging move, this prosecution which has come into picture?
So let me first go back to the comment that you made, on basis of you making this comment. You said GST is complicated, right? So GST is complicated because, as I said, it is all about the size of the country and the effort that it takes to automate everything that is happening today, right? Yeah. But have we forgotten about the days when there were like 13 or 14 different regulations which was subsumed in one single regulation of GST, right? We all probably remember about excise duties and customs being tracked separately, octroi being tracked separately, and the number of tax compliances that were there at that point in time. So we are challenging GST today because there are a lot of compliance. But if you really think about it and compare it with what you were doing initially with the 13, 14, 15 regulations and the physical way of doing those regulations, I think you will be much more happier doing the compliances under GST.
But on that front, Pavan, there is this thing that it was supposed to provide a respite, but there are glitches, right? People will always find glitches in any piece of legislation which comes up because
people are so as human beings, I think we are afraid of changes, right? So, but once you get used to that, it will be much more smoother. Is my personal belief, right? So GST will evolve. It will take time to settle down because of the size that we are talking about in our country, but eventually it is the way to go, right? India has been only country which has rolled out GST across the country without rolling it out in different parts and stuff like that. So you need to give some credit to the government for what they have achieved, right? So that's the first part. Now coming to prosecution, the question that you raised. Look, prosecution or the ability to prosecute was always there as part of the income tax regulations, right? So what the tax law stated is that if you're doing anything wrong, if you're providing incorrect information, if you're using money of the government and stuff like that, then we have the powers to prosecute.
Yep.
What is wrong in it, right? So if today, if I make a payment to a consultant, I have to deduct taxes and I pay it to the government, right? But if I deduct that taxes and if I don't deposit it with the government, then I'm using government's money. There's nothing incorrect in law to have prosecutions being initiated in those situations. And undertaking compliances and failure to do compliances, will it lead to prosecution? Technically, yes, it will lead to prosecution. But I think if you have legitimate reasons in terms of why the tax compliances were not done and stuff like that, then I don't think that the government would just go whole hog on initiating prosecution proceedings on everything that happens in India, right? All the cases that you heard about, and you're a lawyer, so you know the details much more better than I do. All the cases that we've looked at for prosecution, those were grave failures on part of the taxpayers, right?
But on that, Pavan, there is, I mean, rightly said, right? Prosecution is an arm. But what happens is in India, you know how the legal system works, right? When we have the power and authority to prosecute, it comes out very high-handedly on the assessees, right? And globally, if you see whether it was Vodafone or whether it was other clients, and I'm not even getting into their figures and how it went because I'm not from that domain, but legally what we see in courts, how high-handedly the government comes down and the power is being used to harass the assessee. And I would use that term because legally we look at that. And I just want your take on it, nothing in detail. Don't you think that arming, of course, penal provisions and penalty always part of all the legislations for prosecution, but it being used judiciously, right? The code is such, the Income Tax Act is such, is applicable to all. It being used judiciously, that power which we talk about, right, being put on, and the assessees being scared that now even for income tax where we were paying penalty and being okay with paying the government the penalty, now the power of arrest really creates a fear, right? And that's a right fear. I mean, anybody should fear, even IRA does it. So don't you think that's a little high-handedness? I mean, are you saying that for a small, let's say, I mean, even if I default in paying off a certain amount of income tax, and I see in smaller circles that officers do go after individuals as well, saying that you did not pay this amount and I have the power to arrest you. Now, that being a financial crime, and the gravity of it concerned, along with if you equate it to other prosecutions that happen under different laws, what's your take on that? Do you feel that is balanced and reasonable, which is there? Or you feel that it's a little higher-ness, or maybe there can be a tweak in this? And is there a tweak in it which you have seen in your experience?
So I'll tell you, with all the time that I have spent advising clients on tax matters, I haven't seen prosecution proceedings being initiated without a proper cause of action.
Right.
It has not been initiated in situations where there is genuine defaults or there is a genuine reason as to why the taxes were not deposited and stuff like that. Right. Prosecution notices have generally been initiated in situations where there is a grave failure. Okay, there is enough and more opportunity given to the taxpayers before prosecution is even initiated. So as a process also, it's not that you will all of a sudden you will get a prosecution notice. There will be a show cause notice which will give you enough and more time to respond and to give reasons as to why something has happened. There is a process whereby even if you have defaulted, okay, once you get the notice and if you realize that, okay, I have really missed out something, there is a process whereby you can file an application which is called a compounding application.
All right.
And reach out to and file it formally with the tax office saying that, okay, this is the issue or this is the default that has happened, but I want to come clean. And please help me. I'm ready to pay the taxes, the relevant fees and stuff like that, and do not go into prosecution.
Right.
So there is a formal process available as well. So long and short of it is that prosecution proceedings have always been used judicially by the tax office. It may come out more aggressively when you have discussions with the tax office, but I think they have, to be fair, I think they have been judicious in terms of invoking prosecution proceedings.
So for all our listeners, why I put up this to Pavan was so that I've got some queries stating in that, this is what happens in the tax law. Now, I think all your doubts are pretty much clear that the regime is pretty much in your favor. You have to support yourself, as I say in law. Until you help yourself, the law will not help you. So you do need to follow that. And with this, Pavan, we'll go into the second part of the things, which is the startups and what can probably advice you can give to them in terms of the direct tax code regime around them and the Income Tax Act, and what they can follow to make their startups more compliant and better. Thank you for listening to Know Your Kanoon. Catch Know Your Kanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you enjoy listening to content on the IVM Podcast Network, let me tell you about a couple of things that you should check out this week. On Golgappa, Trupti is joined by Indrajit More, a content creator for Bhadipa and Bhatupa. They discuss traveling on a budget and so much more. Is John McClane the essential everyman, or is he a goddamn all-American hero? On the Geek Fruit Podcast, Tejas is joined by friend and roommate Abhimanyu as they discuss the Die Hard franchise. This week on a special episode of the Pragati Podcast, Pavan talks to host of Pulyabazi Pranay Kotastane about State Formation Day and how states need to rise to the expectations of its residents. On Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Janice and Anirudh continue their teen drama series, and this time they're talking about The Politician and Dear White People. Thanks, and we hope to see you again soon.
How many times have you caught yourself Googling stuff on health and wondering if it's the right information? How many times have you heard different health experts give opposing views, which has only left you confused? There are rising cases of cancer, heart, diabetes, stress, and autoimmune diseases. Meet the patients and the experts who paved the path of true healing. Join me, Rachna Chachi, cancer nutrition coach and nutritional therapist on Heal and Hearty. I take you through my own journey of recovery from an incurable disease and the journey of so many others who healed only via nutrition and holistic healing. Find the answers you seek for what's good for your health and what's good for your soul. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. Don't forget your date with good health.